Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin. Tjong-Alvares with a roundup of the latest economic reports. Coming up, Egypt's Al-Sissi rigs in agreements worth billions of dollars. And as Israel prepares to vote, housing prices take center stage. First, the headlines. Egypt agreed $36.2 billion in investment deals at the close of a three-day conference to kickstart the economy. In addition to gas and power deals included in the investment project, Egypt also won $5.2 billion in loans from international institutions. The conference served as a ringing endorsement of President Abdel Fattah al-Sissi and his fight against Islamist militants. But Sissi told a cheering audience at the conference Egypt would need much more funding to improve its situation.
I know Egypt and its problems, and I know the solution for them as I see you in front of me. Now Egypt needs more than $200 to $300 billion, so there is a hope that the 90 million people can work properly and live properly. So we still need more and more.
More than 1 million demonstrators marched in cities and towns across Brazil on Sunday, protesting the sluggish economy, rising prices, and corruption. The crowds also called for the impeachment of leftist President Dilma Rousseff, who was narrowly re-elected just 5 months ago. The country may slip into recession this year as inflation is at a 10-year high and Brazil's currency has lost over 22% against the dollar. Opponents say Rousseff's administration is to blame for the heavy spending, subsidized lending, and corruption that have weighed on growth since she took office.
This movement isn't only against Dilma, it's against everything that is going on. The country is being sold, the corruption, it's not enough to just take them out of power. We need to get back everything they took from us, double.
European stocks rallied for a second day, extending gains after completing their longest weekly winning streak since June. The Stoxx Europe 600 index rose further in London on Monday, climbing for a sixth week, boosted by commodity producers. The benchmark gauge advanced past an 8-year high, pushing its valuation to 16.7 times estimated earnings, the highest in at least a decade. Germany's DAX index, which has rallied 23% this year, surpassed 12,000 for the first time. General Electric is selling part of its GE Capital consumer lending unit to an investor group including KKR and Deutsche Bank for about $6.3 billion. The Australia and New Zealand-based unit, which provides personal loans and credit cards, has more than 3 million customers. GE has shed consumer finance businesses to reduce its presence in banking and focus on industrial operations instead. GE's chief executive aims to reduce GE Capital's share of the broader company's profit to 25% in 2016, from 42% last year and more than 50% before the financial crisis. Despite aggressive downsizing, GE still ranks as the 7th largest U.S. bank. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sissi claimed broad support from the international community at a 3-day investor conference that ended on Sunday. And with billions pledged to boost the battered economy, he has much to be thankful for.
Abdel Fattah al-Sissi is smiling. The Egyptian president has successfully returned his country to the international stage. Despite speedy trials and sentencing the death of hundreds of Muslim brothers, over 100 countries have moved to Sharm el-Sheikh, including the United States and European countries such as Germany, the United Kingdom, and France.
This conference, it marks the return of Egypt, an international economy concern and financial investment. It is essential.
For the Egyptian president, the objectives are clear. Get investments to boost the economy. According to official figures, unemployment is stuck at 13%. But the growth has already started to rise and should reach 4% in June. To achieve the 6% growth, investments are essential. The Gulf countries have already pledged $12.5 billion.
Today's announcement of $12.5 billion of aid to Egypt in the coming period really puts us at ease and makes us confident that Egypt will develop and improve even more than before.
At Sharm el-Sheikh, the Egyptians formalized substantial contracts, especially in the energy sector. With the German company Siemens, the Egyptian government has signed a 4 billion euros deal that includes construction of a power plant for gas. On Saturday, the British oil giant BP also signed a 12 billion investment contract for a gas field in the Western Nile.
We have several projects worth $20 to $25 billion, but we cannot confirm at this time which projects will be signed. Several negotiations took place recently, and God willing, many of the projects will be signed.
All of this has a mobilizing political sense. Spearheading the inter-Arab mobilization Egypt wants to create for intervention military against the Islamic State. Support from the West can't resume territories won by the fundamentalists, and a deal by Sissi means development of the economy.
Social enterprises which tackle social problems are on the rise, though they face many hurdles in seeking financing. Following is an interview we had with a social entrepreneur. Israel's high-tech sector got a serious boost from the government in the 90s with about a $100 million investment in 10 VCs. Currently, with everything that's going on in Israel in terms of social justice, we might be ready to see investment in a different type of fund. And with us today, we have Mr. Alan Barkat from Dualis, a social investment fund. Mr. Barkat, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So what exactly is Dualis? What do you focus on here, and what is the government's part of this?
Dualis is a non-for-profit organization that is a real investment activity into for-profit businesses that focus on training and employing people with disabilities, people on the margins of society. And we're basically taking the venture capital model, and instead of backing tech entrepreneurs, we're backing social entrepreneurs, part of the social justice movements, in developing new entrepreneurial ways of doing social good that are not the traditional philanthropy and government-backed.
Now, the government has basically set aside 20 million shekels, which is about $5 million, for a fund to help boost this initiative. Is it enough?
Well, we're at a very, very embryonic stage of the social investment world. And social businesses are starting to crop up around Israel. There's even one in this building downstairs called the Women's Courtyard in the port that works with a young woman at risk. And these businesses across Israel, there's probably several hundred today. In Europe, there's also a group. In the United States. But it's a young industry. It's not like the tech industry, when it came into Israel, was very, very established in other parts of the world.
Of course. How do we compare to the rest of the world, actually, on that topic?
I think we're in a very, very good state. There's obviously the UK and Italy and Germany are more advanced in the area of social activity, social entrepreneurship. In the United States, it's a growing area. I would say that Israel's in a very good place.
Okay. And what kind of people are you working with? I mean, you mentioned people who are handicapped or basically in situations where they can't get to work as easily, can't be employed as easily. Are we also talking about people underemployed or people in certain sectors of society where they don't have access necessarily as easily to education or to work opportunities?
We're focusing on setting up social businesses that are corporations that we own, and all the profits go back into doing good. We're saying is doing good is doing well, yeah. Or the other way around. And we're basically investing into small businesses that a quarter to half of the employees from what we call people in the margin society. So, for instance, we're involved in a restaurant here called Liliot, one of 5 restaurants that we've backed. Mm-hmm. These restaurants have got a social worker in them. Yeah. 10 to 15 youth that have dropped out of high school at the age of 16. A third of them already have a criminal record. And they go through a 12 to 18-month program of basically rehabilitation and vocational training to be kitchen staff, cooks, young chefs. And those programs, which today we've been running for about 10 years in Israel, are starting to show a very, very high rate of success, of the outcome being that 5 years after they've completed the 1-year program, about 90% of the graduates in these programs are back into a normal part of society, which is a very, very high rate.
Absolutely. Now, what is the potential for this? I mean, are we looking essentially at a relatively low, small amount of companies, or can we see really realistically this expanding to the point where we see thousands of people going into these jobs?
Well, let's look at this from 2 ways.
Yeah.
In a macro way, I believe that social businesses are the answer to a middle ground between what's called the greedy capitalism and the socialism which is bankrupt. And so it's a middle ground, because all of our businesses are targeted to make half as much profit as a regular business without the social activity. So we basically, from our profits, ongoing, take care of the extra social costs. So usually we have about 1.5 times the number of employees because it's on-the-job training. Now that's from the top down. Now if we look from the bottom up, let's say we now have 5 areas that we're active in. Restaurants and cafes, retail stores, software testing. We've got a manicure business for single mothers on welfare that they're learning a business they can then go home and set up. And we just opened a social catering business. And if you take, let's just take the retail and restaurants. If you had one of those in every city across Israel, I don't know, would you have 200 of them, let's say?
Right.
And each one takes care of, say, 10 to 15 individuals every year. So that's 2,000 to 3,000. Over 10 years, we're talking about thousands and tens of thousands of people that we're taking from one side of the equation to the other, from the side where they're being supported by the country and the economy to being contributing to the country.
Right.
Now, what people don't realize, and that's probably the most important impact of social businesses, is the fact it's like a ripple effect, because it's just like you throw a little rock into a pond. So the first ripple is the participants in the program. We help them learn a profession and their personal development, actually learn what it means to go to work, which is not a trivial issue. Plus, they make a salary. All of our employees are paid full salaries and benefits, just like any other employee.
Right.
The second is their families. The third is the other employees in the business, because about half of the employees are regular employees. It's an on-the-job training apprenticeship program. Those people are they don't usually meet with dropout youth that have been in prison. They don't meet with young mothers that have been abandoned.
It really has an effect beyond just the people who are directly involved. Well, Mr. Al-Barkat, thank you so very much for joining us from Tjong-Alvares. I hope to have you on the show again and to hear more about the success in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
As Israel prepares for the elections on Tuesday, campaigning parties have quickly caught on to the issue that concerns most Israelis, the economy. The cost of living has skyrocketed in recent years, but it is the price of housing in particular that concerns most voters.
Eitan lives with his family in Beit Zait, on the outskirts of Jerusalem. He and his wife work 5 jobs between them. It's enough to pay the rent, but not to buy a house.
Even when you work and you manage to save up between $800 and $1,000 a month, it's not enough to produce enough capital to allow you to buy a house. So if your parents can't help you, it's not possible to even think about buying a house.
The housing crisis has been a key issue ahead of legislative elections being held in Israel on March 17th. Prices have soared in recent years, a 55% increase between 2008 and 2013. Last year, they rose another 5%. In Jerusalem, a 4-room apartment costs around $470,000. In Tel Aviv, it can go all the way up to $700,000.
Housing prices in Israel have exploded starting in 2008. Actually, between 2000 and 2007, prices decreased, and there was no demographic change in 2008. But what happened in 2008 is that a lot of money went into the housing market because of the decrease of the interest rate caused by the global economic crisis.
The high cost of living has angered many Israelis who are calling for housing reform. In 2011, hundreds of thousands of them camped out in the center of Tel Aviv, the biggest social protest in Israel's history. In recent weeks, some have set up their protest tents once again.
Do they want the Zionist idea to disappear only because it's expensive? They must start solving the problems. We don't have any more time to wait. We want an immediate change of the housing cost.
The message seems to have been heard. In the build-up to the elections, all parties have pledged to bring housing costs down.
And Daniel, what would you say is the biggest issue here in the elections?
Well, it's security issues, economic issues, cultural issues. These are all kind of on the table. Of course, security issues take the cake in most people's eyes, most of the politicians' eyes anyways. I think the undercurrent, though, is that people want economic issues spoken about, And slowly, in the post-2011, post-social protests world, politicians are talking about this stuff, the economic issues, the housing issues, the cost of living. These kinds of issues are making their way up into the oh-so-important, untouchable echelon that security holds in this country.
Right. Actually, I mean, we're going to have a talk about this actually tomorrow when the elections take place. You're going to be joining us, along with other people who have what to say about the elections,
Right, about gas, real estate, all kinds of issues.
Right. Well, Daniel Roth, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
That takes us to the end of this edition, and we will be here again tomorrow with more on the elections, more on the issues behind the elections, the things that actually are most important to the actual voters in Israel. And do stay tuned for that. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Thanks for joining us, and do join us again tomorrow for more on the economy and the elections.